So hello everyone, thank you for joining us today in this month's second Saturday. Today's lecture is titled Traditions of the Santero, and this will feature two of Casa's most trusted conservators, talking a little bit about techniques that are used to conserve and restore Bultos or santos. Santos are a living tradition within the religious iconography of Spanish folk art. These sculptures are of saints and other religious figures and were an integral part of the Spanish colonization of the Americas. The tradition of wooden santo carving has been preserved as a folk art in parts of Mexico and northern Mexico even today. So Allison Herrera is an assistant curator of historic objects for both archaeological museum collections and private collections. Herrera graduated from the University of New Mexico in 2019 with a degree in anthropology and has worked as the project manager for a private conservation practice. The practice has worked to conserve and restore Spanish colonial and territorial New Mexican wood, 17th century Chinese polychrome sculptures, 18th century American and European furniture, and 18th and 19th century Dutch and English paintings. As a conservator for the Albuquerque Museum's collection, she's conserved a 19th century New Mexican table, 20th century wooden sign, and even more. In 2020, Allison conserved the work of 3 19th century Santeros for the Albuquerque Museum's collection. And I don't see him yet, but hopefully we have Keith joining us. Keith Bakker has worked in historic conservation for nearly 30 years. He is a private conservator and has been on contract for the Albuquerque Museum. Bakker was an adjunct professor of anthropology at the University of New Mexico and worked as the director for the conservation department of the Society for Preservation of New England Antiquities in Boston. His work has ranged from collections management and exhibit installation to conserving Native American pottery and textiles, Spanish colonial wood and art, and other African American and European historic objects. So with that, I will go ahead and let you take it away, Allison.
All right, thank you so much, Aaron. It's just going to be me today. Keith has an aversion to webcams, apparently, so, but I got it covered. He gave me some of his 35mm slides to go take to this lovely store here called Print Stop. You know, I was doing this yesterday, running around, taking his slide projector film and turning that into JPEGs for my presentation. So I'm happy to show his work to you all today. So let me figure this whole thing out. I've done many Zoom meetings, which I'm sure we all have at this point, but I've never been on the other side of it before, so we'll see. We will see what I'm doing here. 1 second. Okay, here we are. I made it. Oops, let me just not give away all my secrets here at first. Let me present. Let me see. There we go. Okay, here we are. So I know Aaron mentioned that I've done work for Casa San Ysidro in the past, and I did include a few pictures of that today because we seriously, me and Keith love Casa San Ysidro. We think it's the best. We love their collection so much, and we're so happy to have been invited back for 2020's work. I keep saying work that we did last summer, but that was 2019 because this year has just been so crazy that I feel like, you know, 2020 we did some work there, but I don't know. I feel like either 2020 didn't happen or we're still in it. I haven't decided yet. So first off, these are the 3 that I'm going to be talking about today, along with kind of the second half of the Keith's past work, which I'll explain a lot of kind of ideologies that we think about even before we get a paintbrush in our hand, even before we take our notes. Just a lot of background information regarding curator preference, history of use, artist intent. We'll get into all that good stuff in just a minute. So here is our first Bulto, which is the Christ on the Crucifix by Jose Benito Ortega. This is dated for 18. I'm not going to go super into the artist's history. I feel like that could be an entire separate lecture. What I am going to be focusing on is the conservation work specifically, and some construction techniques that I've noticed in my conservation. So I will put dates. I don't have dates for every single thing, but that's a whole other lecture about just Santero history, and I will be providing some recommended readings so that if you're interested, you can go check out the more extensive history of these Santeros. So, second guy we're going to be talking about is San Antonio by Rafael Aragon from the 19th century. And he came with his beautiful rosaries, which I thought was a beautiful touch. I feel like, Aaron, are they all accessioned separately? Him and his rosaries?
The rosaries are not accessioned, actually.
Oh, they're not? I could have swore I saw a little. Okay. Anyways, and then is going to be St. Francis, created by the Laguna Santero between 1820 and 1860. So before I get into that, just wanted to show some of the work that me and Keith did before those three that we did just a couple months ago. And this first one was a Tinicho, dated 1880 to 1895. And what we did was can you guys see my cursor on the screen? Is that something that, okay, cool, because I'm going to be pointing out some things. So I just wanted to make sure I'm not talking about something you have no idea that I'm pointing to. So what we did was we fixed this joint right here and a couple of other joints. We just used super glue because of the materials that wouldn't bother the glaze on the metal. So we also fixed the fixture that was up on the wall, because before you could see the original piece of leather that was used to hang it up on the wall. And then we have a piece of wire connecting to a zip tie, connecting to a screw in a wall. So, and then we have these brackets here in the wall to try to, get this to stay in the wall, because, adobe houses, there's not a right angle in sight. So, you have to get creative when you're hanging up your art. So on the picture on the right here is the shelving that we fastened. Keith measured the very weird measurements at the top and the bottom of the nicho, and the nicho just squeezes right into the wall. So that's that. We also fixed Pete Smith's sign that you'll see on Old Church Road, or you would, but ever since we conserved it, it's been living inside, which is probably for the best, because the paint was quite literally jumping off of the wood. And as you can see this is an after, and this is a before. So what we did was use the glue, which you can still see down here, that's in the process of drying, but we would wait for it to dry, and then we would use a heat spatula to flatten down the rolled up paint and get the nice flush texture. And we got it so smooth that you could actually rub it and no paint would come off. So that was a success. And Corrales loves Pete Smith, rightfully so. So we were happy to do that for Corrales as a whole. And the other one, this is just poor guy. You look like Swiss cheese. Oops, here we go. And there's that. Just wanted to throw in a few quick pictures of this just to show our relationship with Casa San Ysidro. And this was a work table. Keith told me that he and the past curator of Casa San Ysidro, she had just seen this work table living out in one of the storage rooms, and she was like, oh, I just want to see something done to this, sweet green table. And so it was so wobbly, you could just spin it around like a hula dancer pretty much. And we used clamps and shims to tighten up all the joints. And so now that is the most sturdy table you could ever imagine, especially coming from an accessioned Mexican, museum. So, okay, now, and I'm gonna get some water. Feel free to do your normal things. We're all people, so I'm going to be drinking water as needed. So this is our crucifix. I'm showing these photos from the museum vault because before we actually started work for Casa on this particular, we worked on another one of Ortega's crucifixes for a private client. And we asked Aaron, we were like, hey, can we take a couple of reference photos? Because we were taking this new cross that had been put on this Ortega and we were turning it black with reversible shellac. And so here's the pictures of that. Here's our other guy. We notice a lot of, which I'll get into this too a little bit more later, but we need similar construction methods with these, which is why we think they're both Ortega, and plus the style of it just is very Ortega. And so we see the breaks in the shoulders and we see the breaks in the ankles, which we'll see with the other one as well. And you can just tell that the tension of him having his arms out and only being fastened to the cross with his hands and his feet, you can tell the tension is the same for, you know, all of the crucifixes, you know, they carry their weight the same, which is very interesting to see. So we fixed that up. I don't think I included too many photos of that. And I just wanted to show, like, we love Ortega. We're mega fans of him. So I will move right along to our most recent 3. So these are our before treatment photos, just a few of them, because we probably take hundreds of photos. I spared everyone most of the photos, but we, before we start work, we pretty much just be looking at what do we see, what's going on, what work has to be done, why. So first thing we saw are these cracks that go right along his chest. And what we had to do then was wiggle his arms to see if there was any movement whatsoever, because if there is, then we have a serious problem. He's gonna fall off of the cross. So luckily those weren't wiggly at all. You know, they were actually pretty stable. They had previously been glued by what looked like white glue, just maybe some Elmer's glue that somebody had, you know, just a typical white glue. And that was for both of his shoulders as well. But for his ankles, they were not glued at all. They hadn't been repaired yet. They were completely cracked and wiggling pretty much just within the dowel that you see here. They were just wiggling. And so, let me see. Oh, and for this photo on the left here, this was also the previous repair, but it just left a lot of gaping holes. So I ended up filling those holes and in painting to make it blend in a little bit better. So here's my during treatment work. I really love these 2 photos because it really shows our 3 steps that we take into mind when we're starting our work. And that is the 3 steps in filling and in painting. So consolidation pretty much says, is there stuff falling off? And if so, how do we get it back on? Like with Pete's sign, the paint was falling off. So we had to glue down every single individual paint flake so that it wouldn't fall off. And we think about this, you know, with paintings, with frames, with anything that we work with, because chances are if it's old, there's something falling off of it. So our next step is to fill, which, so this photo here of his ankles shows the consolidation stage where I had put some hide glue into this crack to repair the joint. That was as close as they were going to get, and I wasn't going to force it. So that, you know, that's where they live now. And I was able to get the angle right so that the dowels went perfectly through. So, you know, and then for the fill stage on his shoulder over here, where my gesso is here, and for the gesso we used just a standard calcium carbonate, gesso mixed in B72. I'm not going to get super into the materials, and I do have my email at the end if anyone has specific questions about materials, but pretty much the only thing to keep in mind as far as materials go is we want to know the materials that the object was made with, so that we don't use anything that will react negatively with those materials. So for example, all of our Bultos used water-based materials. So we used materials that are soluble in xylene and toluene just to avoid any kind of wear or damage to the original surface. We definitely wanted to avoid that. So we didn't any watercolors for in painting, none of that. We used pure pressed pigments in E72, which is an acrylic resin. So, and then the third step is in painting. And you can see that on his shoulder right here, where I actually did get started building up the layers of the skin color on his chest. So 2 images to show the 3 steps that pretty much every item takes, which is consolidation, filling, and then in painting. And we never, as you can see, you know, this is a very irregular line. We never want to go over the boundaries in any way or cover up any of the original surface, because that's not what we do. You know, we preserve as much as we possibly can, and we don't dream of doing anything else. So I'll move right along. I think, oh, here we go. So I included these photos because not only are they cool to see different materials look like under UV light, but this is actually a very useful tool for conservators to see the history of use and history of repairs. So let's see, on the left here, we have our San Antonio Bulto with our little Christ child sitting in his hand. And he has been glued before, and that's why it looks blue. The guy in the middle, we didn't even work on him, but as we had the UV light in the chapel at Casa San Ysidro, we just noticed that he was glowing so orange. We were like, wow. And I asked Keith, I'm like, what is so orange? And he's like, that's 100% shellac. Shellac is always bright orange under UV light. And so we looked at him in the regular lighting, because the room has to be pitch black for the UV light. And you could see this beautiful repair that blended in seamlessly to the original, you know, robe color. It was like red and green, I believe. Somebody had redone his neckline beautifully, and yeah, it was, you know, it's exactly what we do. So I just wanted to show how UV is used in our like thought processing, helps us plan our work. And then here's Jesus over here, just with his little missing pieces, which I ended up filling. And then you could see the glue lines in his shoulders under the UV as well. So here are a couple more photos during my work on him. You can see how I'm trying to build up layers of this like skin tone in here, trying not to, you know, get out of the lines, but if I do, then I could easily wipe them away, because of all of the materials that we use are reversible, and we make sure that they're reversible. So, you know, nothing is destroyed. If somebody doesn't like my work in the future, they can get a cotton ball, add some solvent, and take it all away in one swipe. So you can kind of see how I'm just looking at the color palette I'm given, which is kind of a wild one. It's pink, it's yellow, it's red, it's brown, it's green, it's white, it's black. So it's all of these things all at once. And you can't just fill these surfaces with the solid color, because it won't look right. You have to mix and match all of these different layers and build and do stippling. And I actually at one point kind of like mashed it with my brush so that it was just kind of very random technique I was using, and that ended up being perfect because it just mimicked the natural aging of the surface and, you know, layers that had been cleaned away later, and, you know, all of the history of that skin tone that I was mimicking. And so the photo on the right here is my gesso fill on those little braids. So working face down. So I had to have them standing up or hanging or laying down. But if I was, you know, I was putting gesso in his back, and it would all just leaked out of his back if I had left him laying down. So you can see how the gesso glued kind of weird over here. Kind of a process of letting my fill dry and then seeing what it looked like. Some things you just can't predict. And, you know, if some dripped out, you could, in terms of that, especially when we're working with gravity and the object is too fragile to just be laid down the most convenient way. You know, we definitely aren't working within the bounds of convenience as our, you know, the thing that we rely on the most. It's not what it's about, really. So that's that photo. What else I got? Here we go. Okay, so see, I'm a rookie, you guys. I don't know. Here we go. All right, so this photo on the left here of me holding this little dowel, I realized, and I told Aaron immediately, I was like, Aaron, we have an issue. I feel like our Jesus has been hanging on just by his little hand dowels this entire time. And I felt them at the very beginning. I felt that they were a little bit loose, so I pushed them in as hard as I could to make sure that he was stable for my work. And then I was like, okay, no, I need to recheck this. So I tried, and sure enough, they just came right back out. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I checked that, because he's hanging up on a wall for his whole life, and we need that longevity out of our work. So we're not trying to have Jesus fly off the wall over here. So I did end up I ended up putting a little bit of glue in here, and just really hard as I could, you know, as hard as his little hand would allow. And now he's good to go. Same with his ankles. I glued the dowels like crazy just to make sure that he was super secure. I will say glue is the one material that tends to be the least reversible, but at the same time, we kind of have to balance the desire for reversibility, but with the not be broken. So it's, you know, it's tough to kind of balance all these concepts, because we don't want to take anything away from an object. We don't want to change its history. We just kind of want to supplement it. And, you know, if it's going to be broken in 10 years, but the paint looks great, then what did we even do for the object? So with gluing, we kind of not compromise, but we just did that. That's a more important aspect to work with. So let's see. Oh, this middle picture here shows his ankles, and it shows that, I don't know, let me see, let me move my little, all your beautiful faces over because I can't see. There we go. This shows kind of just the many layers, and this right here is my work. This is my gesso, because my glue was in here. So this is my paint mixed with a little bit of, you know, gesso over here. That's still drying. I'm still trying to figure out the tone of the skin, still trying to figure out how far down to go, because down here isn't the same color as up here, but there is some historic repainting that happened. They added extra little blood droplets. So, you know, I couldn't really paint that much further down. Like, this is all my gesso right here in the middle, because it was just like a gaping hole inside of his ankles. So I ended up just stopping right at this ridge here, because I didn't want to go too far. You know, it's not necessary, and we just don't do that. So over here, the third picture on the right is his shoulder, which you could see under the UV light. It was this big white glowing area because his, you know, paint layer had just fallen away, revealing the gesso. So you can see how my inpainting is slowly blending in. I'm using brown for this area because there's brown here. You know, if I were to use brown in a different area, it would look completely wrong. But the way that these objects age and the way that they're cleaned, the way that they're cared for later on, they have just a very irregular pattern to their skin, which is very beautiful, I feel like. So, you know, I always enjoy, I love doing skin tones, because the screen, I use like hot magenta red. So you never know what colors you'll be adding to your little palette when you encounter a new skin tone. Here are some after treatment photos, and some that was what I was going for at the moment. But you can see under his armpit here that you can still see that something has been broken, but it's not just like screaming out your name like, hey, look at me. You know, it's not distracting anymore. And that's really what we care about, especially when we talk with curators and it's in a museum. So obviously the purpose of it is to be shown. So we always like to just say, like, what's distracting and what's not, what takes away from the artist's original intent. So that's, and then you can see the front as well, and you can still see it was broken. You know, it's not our job to make him look like he was never broken, you know, because it's fine that he was broken. He's still here. So you know, that's just not our goal. Please, our next. I have some more. Okay, good. So here you can see the ankles, how they're about 5 different colors. You know, this is super weird over here because I feel like a whole chunk of gesso is missing from his feet, but I don't think this is a whole new foot under here. So, you know, there's some ambiguity that goes along with the history of these objects. And you never know how old the repairs are unless you do and you can tell which materials are newer, which are older, what they're made out of. And that's a lot of what Keith did. In the past, he worked with microscopy, and I actually do have a couple of his microscope slides in here just showing red paint pigment. That's in the second part of the lecture where I go through his old work. So I wanted to highlight those ankles because it was really, I'm surprised his foot was still on there, honestly. And then the finished product here.
A good portion of the back was a greenish blue, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it was this very weird, like gray color. And that's what that kind of was shown on his feet as well. There's this like grayish, it was like, it almost had, I had to put some purple into it too to like match these colors back here. It was a very strange color, and we don't really know like what repairs were done, or if it's a new foot, or if the outer layer just so fell off, or, you know. Just making sure I'm not forgetting things I'd like to point out. But yeah, just pretty much wanted to make it all blend in and not look like a gaping hole in the back of his shoulder. So now we'll move on to San Antonio. This is actually the first one I got started on because I really, really wanted to work on this little Jesus because he was super neat. I really enjoyed it. This is by Raphael Aragon in the 9th. You can see these are the before photos. So you can see that his neck is very, very cracked. It's his head pretty much rotated in the socket. So because what they would do is they would carve the body, and then they would carve the head separate and mold the head and then fasten them together. So oftentimes that joint, you know, it wasn't connected all together to begin with. So you see the wear start to go there, and where the gesso lays over the top of that wood joint, the wood starts to shift and the gesso cracks on top of it because it doesn't move around and stretch and shrink with the wood. So you can see the same thing happen with the small Jesus over here. And I think I have more pictures. I should. Here we go. See, he was really, really bad. He was barely holding it together over here. He did have some old glue, some white glue again. But he was still very, very loose. His head was like rocking around, and his joint connecting him to San Antonio's hand was unstable as well. And I looked at that in person, and I swear to you, it was literally a matchstick. I feel like somebody used a match to repair this joint, which, you know, these are community objects. And part of what makes them so special is that everybody takes care of them, you know, especially for different feast days, different family saints, and they care for them. And it's what you know what I mean? It's however they repair their objects for their own devotional practices is great. You know, they're being repaired and they're being cared for and they're being loved. And that's what's really important with these objects. So this one, this was interesting too. You could see in this third picture on the right here that he has 2 holes on the bottom of him. And we can kind of do the detective work for these objects because oftentimes we're the first ones to get our hands on them in quite some time. So we were kind of speculating, like, okay, is this a Jesus child that was originally on something else? Like, does he have different attributions that maybe he doesn't match up with the San Antonio? Is the second hole towards his feet just what the artist used to carve him? You know, so we have all of these things that we get to speculate on, which is kind of fun, you know, and then it's like the detective part of our job, which is you know, it's always fun to just be the first ones to get greedy little hands on it, you know. That's what Keith likes to say. He said, can't wait to get my greedy little hands on this. So, and here's some pictures. I just wanted to show some of myself working because it's often kind of alarming when you see a hypodermic needle sticking out of this 100-year-old piece of art, but that's how you get the glue in the cracks. You have to use a hypodermic needle to get it in those joints properly to make sure that they stay. So that's what I'm doing in this third picture. Let's see, in that middle photo, it looks like I am doing the in-painting on the skin tone of the Christ child. And those are my material. Oops. Sorry, I keep doing that. So you can see all of my dry pigments there. We keep them in film canisters. If I need a rust colored red, I will quite literally use iron oxide. All of our powdered pigments are the true pigments, and I mix them all together to create the color that I need. I've tried using pre-mixed colors in the past, but they just don't work for me because I feel like they have these undertones that make everything look too gray or too muddy almost. So I really enjoy color matching by just using pure pigments, just pure colors. And I feel like it helps me connect to my work better. I feel like I'm actually I understand the process of how these people got their colors for their green robes, their blue robes, their red robes. It's really special to me. So, and the same thing with the skin tones. You know, you can see a lot of depth in their skin based on the undertones and the additional layers that are added after the fact to add the depth to their skin tones. And yeah, that picture on the left is just, I think I just finished the gesso work on the Christ child, and you know, he's looking, oh, here we go. It's very dramatic looking because he was super bad, but this, I don't know if you can tell, but on the Christ child's robe, there is a red shade. Actually, a previous repair, and my in painting was I matched this deep red color instead of this like orangey red shade because it was very difficult to match. I have a lot of colors at my disposal, but sometimes you just can't get that shade right. And you know, you can't go have Jesus with a mismatched robe. I'm sorry, but it's just not going to happen. So he got some red, which was easier to match. And I also am showing the gesso work around San Antonio's neck, which was quite extensive because he had just so many cracks and chips and gaps and gouges in his neck. And one thing I wanted to point out that me and Keith thought was really special was, I don't know if you can see this candle wax that's on his collar, but we just thought that was very special because that means that, you know, at one point San Antonio was part of an altar. He had candles dripping on him. He was part of this like very special devotional altar, and we love seeing that. I would never dream of in a million years taking the candle wax off of San Antonio's collar. Never. We would never do that. Another interesting thing to see here is that there's actually some kind of fabric poking out of the gesso, which all of us kind of discovered simultaneously. I remember Aaron was in here and I was like, Aaron, look at this, like, this is crazy. So it's either some kind of felt or leather, some kind of material that they use to shape the colors. And I was wondering, like, why does this really look like fabric? Like, they really carved that well, they really shaped that well with the gesso, but it really is a fabric. And yeah, we see this on our other Bulto, St. Francis, and I'll show you that in just a minute. So we'll move right along here. Here's the after treatment photos. I pretty much had to give San Antonio here a new neckline and a new collar. You know, if somebody doesn't like what I did here, again, they could get a Q-tip, a cotton ball, and just take it all away. I was actually talking to Leslie, who is well, she's not very new anymore. More time has passed than I thought, but she's the newer curator of Casa San Ysidro, and I was talking to her about kind of her ideologies and preferences on these Bultos, and she was saying she wants to see the conservation work because it's interesting. She wants the conservation work to be part of the history of use. And, you know, because sometimes our goal is to make it blend in seamlessly, so where you can't tell that any work has been done at all. But sometimes you do want to see that work has been done. So it's just a matter of preference. It's a matter of curators. It's a matter of ideologies at the time. You know, we never treat one object in the same way as we treated the last object. They're all different. They all have their own personalities. They all have their own stories and history of uses, their own materials, are between the construction of these items, but they're all just so different. So we just treat them as unique individuals, which they are. Let's see. Oh, I want to rewind a little bit because I wanted to show, I don't know if you can tell, but I have some calipers here and I have a small dowel in the photo here. And what I did was I replaced that matchstick with a new dowel for the Christ child's fitting onto San Antonio's hand. And he fits like a glove now. And I did put a little bit of glue as an extra safety precaution because I'm not gonna have Christ child falling off of anybody's hand. I'm sorry, but not gonna happen. Let's see, let's just catch right on up here. And I love taking after photos of them in their natural habitats. So here he is back there with that perfect lighting once you open those chapel doors. And here's the back of his collar after I did this paint. The candle wax is all totally intact. It was very difficult to avoid it completely, but I managed it. Let's see. Oh, his belt. I can't believe I almost forgot to talk about his belt. His belt is amazing. It's a perfect example of community care and people repairing these objects that they are devoted to. So let me see if I can find a, you know what, this middle one we'll have to do. So if you look on the left one first, you see how it's kind of yellow. His belt is yellow. It has a painted design on it. But then once you get up to here, it's a totally different material. And Keith believes that somebody saw that his belt had fallen off and they used probably some kind of pre-packed like rope caulking for your windows belt. And we think that that's just the most special thing ever. Keith almost went and bought a roll of rope caulking just to be like, to use the calipers to measure that width to see like, wow, are we actually right? You know, because we just see so many creative repairs on these objects because these people, they just, you know, it's in their living room, it's in their church, they bring it home on the weekends, it's the objects that they love. Of course, they're gonna use their own household objects to repair for them or to make repairs for them. So I just wanted to point that out because we thought that was the coolest thing. We're like, we're not touching that, like that is special. There he is, let's see. And here's the third Bulto that I worked on recently. This is St. Francis by the Laguna Santero between 1820 and 1860. So these are the before treatment photos. You can see that he again has these cracks in his neck. He also had cracks on his head, right by his hairline here. And he also has some chipped away areas on his robe. So those were kind of the key things that we focused on in our repairs. And let's see. There we go. I have some during treatment photos for you. There is my gesso fill up on his head there. And then kind of by his neck, I was trying to get that color right, but it was this like very interesting yellowy orange color that I had never really seen before. So, you know, it was always a new experience. So this one was very orange, it was very dark. And the cool thing about his face is that you can tell that he had a coat of shellac over him that had aged over time and somebody cleaned it away. And when you wipe it, it cleans off irregularly if you don't, especially if you don't have the, you know, exact solvent that it needs to dissolve shellac. So you can see how the backs of his ears are very dark. You can see how in the crevices it's dark, but on the high parts of the face it's lighter because that's the parts you hit when you're giving him, you know, a good dusting. So I thought that was very cool to see those old layers. And we'll often see, especially on like retablos and bultos also, you see the faces are like bright white because nobody wants to pray to a face that they can't see. It just doesn't make sense. You know, these are community objects of devotion. You don't want to pray to a face you can't see. So we love seeing a clean face, but sometimes over cleaning does happen, and you start to take away from some of the additional paint, which we don't enjoy, but you know, it's not all the time that we see that. So let's see. This photo on the right here actually does include some of my in-painting. And sometimes I can't even point out the areas. Okay, here's an area. Sometimes it's hard to get the right shine. So sometimes your objects do shine. St. Francis here was very shiny. And sometimes I couldn't get the right shine with my pigments. So sometimes they'll stand out. And so it's kind of a balance of, you know, what materials can I use that won't interfere with the original materials, but will mimic them still. So they have completely different properties. They act in totally different ways, but they still have to blend in. So that's another kind of consideration that we think about when we start to in-paint. So see, I think it's right here, but that's a good sign. When you can't see your own work, that's a good sign, right? So let's see. And here are the after treatment photos of him. He was fairly straightforward. Out of all three of the Bultos that we recently worked on, he didn't give me any troubles. He was not at all, like there was no surprises, thankfully. He did have some cracks on the back of his robe, but that was very straightforward to fill in and in paint. Yeah, he was definitely not the problem child of the group. I feel like the problem child was either San Antonio or the Christ on the crucifix. They had some surprises up their sleeves. So
this was the other Bulto that had
here's some more
cloth around his neck. Yeah. Let me see. Oh yeah, you can definitely see that up here. And you can see it. And somebody had actually painted on the fabric. So this has definitely gotten a new coat of paint. And a lot of these guys, you know, you see brand new shiny sparkly beards with a lot of these guys. Again, you don't need to a thing that doesn't have a face. So a lot of the times that have repainted faces and features, and especially hair, all of the black lines are much more defined. And it's really cool to see that definition on that line there. Even after the gesso had worn away, somebody still repaired and repainted, not repaired, they just repainted that on top of that fabric there. Yeah, thank you for reminding me of that, Erin. I think that is super cool. I'm glad that I didn't forget that part. Let's see. And I think you're frozen, Erin. I don't want to continue on if I'm a little bit disconnected here. I'll just wait 1 second while everyone catches up. I don't want to be lagging at all. Good. I can see you in real time.
Okay. Cool. I just wanted to double frozen on my end, so I know that Zoom is a little disconnected sometimes. All right, so here's a close-up of his little Jesus crucifix that he holds. I did put a little bit of glue on here because the only one to his cross, I skipped ahead, there we go, was just a little tiny bit of sticky wax and a string that wasn't original, but it was still a very, you know, a nice repair that somebody had put on later. So I made sure that he was nice and secure in his hand, and also the little Jesus on his own cross. So this repair was fairly straightforward. It's still a mystery about this little hole on the top of his head, though. I don't know if we ever figured that one out, Erin, but I think San Antonio also had the little hole in his head, and I was thinking, like, you know, maybe with his, you know, tonsure haircut, he somehow the Santeros like constructed them similarly, so they just tend to crack towards the top, or what happened, because the other guy's missing the top of his head, so we don't know what the story is on that one.
Yeah, you can kind of see a crack around the top of his head surrounding that circle.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can even go back to San Antonio and see that the top of his head is actually flat. And at first we thought, well, maybe he used to wear a hat, maybe the attribution was not correct, or, you know, or something. We were just trying to figure out why the top of his head was flat with a hole in it. And we realized, I thought, well, maybe he also just had this little cap on top of his head that had cracked away and had actually been lost for good, instead of just starting to crack like St. Francis here is. So, you know, it's always a mystery. Okay, so before I go on to the previous Bulto work, I just wanted to see if there was any questions. I don't want to go too fast or skip any questions that anyone has. So feel free to unmute yourself, or, you know, go into the chat. I always like to answer questions when I can.
The only question we've had so far is, why is there a hole on the top of San Antonio's head? That's what we just talked about.
Yeah, I'm glad I kind of answered that without realizing that, because yeah, it's a mystery. We don't know if there was an attachment there, or if they used it to stabilize the head during sculpting. You know, it's just really ambiguous, but they all seem to have holes on their head. At least these two guys do. I don't think Jesus had a hole in his head, but yeah, I don't know. I wish I knew.
Hi, excuse me, this is Mary. How many, I've got a frog in my throat. How many tableaus do you work on?
I'm sorry, what was your question? It was a little fuzzy.
How many bultos and retablos do you usually work on in, say, like a year's time?
Well, it really just depends. I've worked on maybe just one that actually belongs to Keith, a retablo, you know, painted on wood. And Bultos, I'm up to what, 4 now. So, you know, my record is like maybe 2 a year on average, I guess. You know, I'm still pretty new in the game. I'm lucky to have Keith as my kind of mentor and advisor. And, you know, I'm learning a lot in a short amount of time. So,
well, I guess
it's definitely something that we want to work.
I was wondering, how many bultos and retablos do they have at the museum? And do they have to be constantly attended to, or can you do a restoration and they're good for another 100 years?
Well, ideally, our restoration will last another 100 years. You know, we like to use strong materials, but still reversible. And those two things can coexist in the same object, or in the same material. So we do want our repairs to last a very, very long time. And Casa San Ysidro has a ton of bultos. They're pretty much in every room. Even that tin nicho in the front room had a little bulto in it. And I was actually going to ask you, Aaron, do you know who that bulto is of? Do you know who that is?
I think it's also Saint Anthony.
Do the families give you these bultos and retablos? You get them?
They're all actually part of the Minge collection owned by the Albuquerque Museum. So Casa San Ysidro was a house that was built in 1875, and a couple purchased it in the 1950s and started collecting Spanish architecture and art from all over the state. So in the late 90s, the Albuquerque Museum purchased the collection.
I see. So in other words, people aren't giving them to you today. I mean, I would think they'd be a sort of family heirloom.
Absolutely. Most of the time they are. If people are trying to give them to museums, they're definitely asking for money.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mary. Yeah.
What kind of mixture or mediums do you use to touch up the paint or in Bultos?
So, well, it just depends on the object. So we first, here we go. Please display an image. There we go. Okay, I hope that's maybe this guy. How about that? So we tend to look at the material that our object is made out of first. And the materials on these guys were water-based. So we wanted to use paints that were not soluble in water. So we totally stayed away from water. We didn't want anything to have anything to do with water, because that would wear away and the materials of the original surface. So what we did was we used B72 acrylic, which is an artificial resin, and we mixed that in with toluene, sometimes xylene. They have very similar solubility properties. And see, Keith is the chemist, but I know what not to mix, thankfully, but not necessarily about the, you know, straight chain hydrocarbon and, you know, all of that. So and then so for our gesso, to do our fills, we used a calcium carbonate mixed into that artificial B72 resin. And for our paints, they're just pure powdered pigments that you can mix into any medium depending on what materials that you're looking to use. So does that answer your question, or did you want me to elaborate any more on that?
Well, what are the different mediums? You said not anything to do with water. What are the other, what do you use then? Is that oil or is it?
Sometimes we see things used in oil, but particularly with these objects, we see a lot of water-based. We don't see a lot of pigments that are pre-mixed, which is what you get with oil. Like nothing really comes out of a tube that they use, not unless it's a repair or a repaint that's done later. We typically see just water-based paints and pigments for these objects in particular. But you know, I've worked on other things. I've worked on oil paints. I've worked on watercolors, water gilding. So I'm familiar with quite a few different mediums in terms of, you know, paints and different surfaces and varnishes. But for these in particular, it was very water-based.
Well, I'll ask one more question about that. When the Bulto was created, the craftsman, this looks kind of like a greenish color. What did they use at that time?
They probably used a green iron oxide, which, you know, is just it's like or not iron oxide. Why can't I think of the name of this? I'm drawing a blank right now what the green is called. But it's just a pure pigment that they would go and mine. You know, it's just like rust comes from these pigments from nature, different minerals and stones.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for your question. Are there any other questions before we move on to our next little segment here?
Yeah, we'll take one more question, and then we'll hold the rest of the questions till the end. But
Okay.
Ann Waters is asking, what woods are used in making the Bulto?
Oh, so typically we see a lot of cottonwood or cottonwood root. We see sometimes pine, but I have one of Keith's microscope slides where we know for sure it's not pine. So we think that it's either cottonwood, or there's some speculation that it's willow. It's really hard to get a 100% identification from taking a sliver of the wood and looking at it under a microscope. And yeah, so generally you'll see pine, especially for the bases. You'll see Douglas fir, which is what we see for the cross. On the one that I worked at from the private contractor, and we speculate that it was for the one part that was part of Casa San Ysidro's collection as well, and a lot of cottonwood also. Cool. Okay, so we will move right along then. I'm going to close up my chat here. So I really am a Zoom rookie. Let's get this figured out here. There we go. Okay. So I wanted to start off with San Juan Nepomuceno. He's by Fronda, and this is part of the Palace of the Governor's collection that Keith worked on in, I think, 1994. And he worked with the curator at the time, I believe, along with, you know, just a couple of his associates. And this, I'll show you a couple pictures in a second, but this is kind of a, I guess, not debated, but I think the reason why it's debated is because they ended up reconstructing pretty much an entire face for him. And normally that you wouldn't really want to do that because, you know, it goes along with the question of artist's original intent, history of use, you know, kind of interfering. We don't want to apply our own biases that we have now to a piece of work from the past. So it gets a little bit tricky. And then you also kind of have to balance that with a curator's preference as well. All of these factors aside, for this exact reason, because despite all of this work, all of this modification, you could still easily take this off with probably toluene that you could buy at Home Depot, you know. So let's see. So yeah, here's a couple more pictures of the work. Let's see. He kind of looks like Superman in this one to me, but with me on that one. But the thing that we like to look at with these is kind of drawing outside the lines, or are they staying in their lane? Are they staying within the bounds of the damage or the layer that's missing, pretty much. So I'll go back to this picture because you can see exactly where the damage starts and stops, and that is exactly where Keith put his new gesso to make these repairs and make this new form for him. And the reason that there's gesso on his face, because, you know, you see he's like, well, wait a minute, why is he building a new nose when he's already got a nose? Like, why is he putting new ears when he's already got ears? Well, that's just the wood showing through and there's no paint. So, you know, there is a little paint there, but, you know, you're kind of adding on to just bare wood instead of covering an artist's actual paint. So I'll go right along here. And there's a couple more close-ups of that, you know, staying painfully in the lines. You know, it would be a lot easier just to, you know, stamp out a new head, but that's just not what we're about. So even though, you know, maybe now, and Keith said, he's like, I would never do this much work on an object again, you know, but at the time, he was telling me just about the ideology of the time, about how him and the curator saw how these items just weren't being revered as special as they knew that they were. They weren't being seen in their true light, you know. He was saying that, you know, do you just want this object to be dusty in storage forever, or do you want to show this? You know, there's a lot that goes into this discussion because, you know, you don't want to take away from an artist's intent in an attempt just to show the object. You know, it's a constant balance, it's a constant discussion. And here's the result. I painted a new face for him. He did use photos, 8 or 12 other Bultos by the same artist. And yeah, he drew on the eyes, new hair, new, I guess, lapels for him. He painted all of that on in reversible material. So again, you know, if somebody ends up being like, hey, well, this is not okay, it can be taken off and he'll be restored back to his former self over here. And also what Keith did was he fastened the head back onto the body, because I don't know if you could tell, because these are part of the 35mm slide photos. So I apologize for the photo quality, but you know, I wasn't sure how they would be scanned in, but here's like a little toothpick. Keith said that it was literally a toothpick keeping him together. So he made sure that he was super sturdy and good to go for another 100 years after this. And I have a photo. So here are two reference photos. I didn't include all of his reference photos, but these were the two that Keith said that he really played upon, you know, that were in Frondrus's Bulto style, with the beard, with the rosy cheeks, you can see, with the hairline, with, you know, just the wear, with the collar. So yeah, let me see. This is all kind of part of just shifting ideologies in general. We see with these Bultos kind of a rejection of an artist's concept. You know, I don't want to go super, but the concept of naturalism, which I'm going to touch on, could be a whole other lecture also. But basically, with the style of this early New Mexican Bulto making and with this religious art, you see a rejection of the highly stylized and highly realistic Bultos in the faces, and you don't see that kind of exact replica over and over and over again like you would see, you know, in Italy or Spain, because not only was Spain, you know, invading and colonizing, so there was like the rejection of that style for that, but it was also just it was just the early New Mexicans making a style of their own. You know, the I guess the rejection of naturalism also played into like the relationship between the person praying and the object. You know, you don't need somebody to look like a cookie cutter version if, you know, your uncle built that, you created the Bulto for you and your family or your town church. You know, it was just a completely different attitude regarding devotion and prayer and saintly figures. So I have a couple of notes about naturalism here. I'm just making sure I'm not forgetting anything. Yeah, just, you know, the literal face of San Antonio or St. Francis wasn't needed. It was about the relationship between the person praying and the object they were praying to. And this is why you see so many people repairing their objects, because you can't, like I keep saying this, but you can't pray to a saint with no face. You can't pray to a saint with no beard. They just maintain these Bultos for their own personal use. And like Mary was saying, you know, these are family heirlooms. These are objects of devotion that are on a smaller scale. They have a more humble attitude around, not as ornate like you see with these super high ceiling cathedrals. And yeah, I'm gonna just look at this question really quick because it is part of the discussion. And let me see. The original does show here. Yeah, so let's go back to let's look at this. You know, it's definitely an open discussion. Oops, going ahead instead of backwards. So there's actually, it looks like this has been worn away. You know, this is down to the wood. I don't know what kind of damage was done to this. You know, I don't know the history of this object, but, you know, I do know the repairs, and I do know that not everybody would choose to do this to their objects. So let's see. Photos. You can see that the reference photos did have long hair. They had hair that was carved, like I guess I'll use mine as an example. You know, the gesso was carved with the neck and the hair as one piece, only with paint differentiating, you know, between this line and the hair. So even though we'll go back, you know, there's no indication of that from the before, is how could there be? You know, they really had to trust their, you know, reference photos and their attributions to this object to make that decision. And Keith said that he definitely would not do this today. He said that this was 1994 and there was a different kind of ideology about this. And again, him and I think the curator, I don't want to say names because I really don't know who else was involved, but I do know Keith was involved. So he said that, he felt very sad for these objects because he comes from, different museums, the Smithsonian. He sees the point of view that kind of the country has on New Mexican art, and they're like, why does it look different? They might not understand this concept of, a rejection of naturalism. They don't understand this intentional straying away from, cookie cutter Catholic art. And while Catholic art is very beautiful, it just, it wasn't the preference for that at the time. So, considering all of these things, all of Keith's work, all the Bultos he's worked on in the past, along with the curator at the time, they decided they wanted to show Fra Andres's Bulto in this way. And, that's just part of and it doesn't have to be part of the history of use because it is reversible. So I know that it's kind of like jarring to see like the before and after, but it is a good discussion to have because, there's no right or wrong. There's shifting ideologies, there's different curators. And again, that is 100% why we have always, not have always, but we use reversible materials because somebody could take all of that away. And you'll see this again, 100% how it was left. Except now he'll have a more stable neck. And that's pretty much the only permanent Keith made on this object. So I hope that answers that question about that. I know that was, I wanted to interject with the question because I know that this is kind of like, a heavily contested concept and idea. So I'm going to go on to another item. This is Jesus Nazareno from the Museum of New Mexico from the 19th century. And I just wanted to include this because it shows the repainting of these objects. Keith said that this object didn't need any work, but he was able to take historic paint samples from a hidden location in the damaged shoulder, which you can see in that middle photo. This also just shows community care with this object too. Somebody used a safety pin from their sewing desk to repair his shoulder so that he wouldn't fall apart. And this Jesus is movable so that they could reenact his crucifixion and the torture that he went through. And so all of that is so important when you're talking about devotion and community care. And, this is an heirloom object. So, I just wanted to bring up, you can see the very stylized blood on his hands and fingers and, his little legs here, and that repainted beard. I'll go back. That repainted beard and his hairline, it's all very stylized and very dramatic and very sorrowful because especially when you get into the artwork from the Marathas and the Penitentes, they wanted to showcase that suffering because they performed the suffering on themselves to feel more connected to Jesus and him dying on the cross. So I just wanted to show that. The next slide is the microscope images. Super interesting. This again kind of helps the materials that we use. On the left here, this is what red paint looks like. You can tell that somebody's assistant grinded this up for him, and because some of the particles are irregular, some are bigger than others, some are smaller. And under a microscope, you wouldn't say that this is like red paint, but this is a paint sample from this, so it's interesting to see how it looks different under a microscope. A good idea of materials and of materials as well from microscope samples. And on the right here, I know somebody asked about how do you know what wood it is. I don't have a slide of what pine looks like, but Keith said that's not pine. That's either cottonwood, maybe it's willow, but we know for a fact that people used cottonwood root to make their basic forms that they would then put gesso over. So Here we have another example. This didn't need any work. This was just Keith visiting the Laguna Church. The reason I included this was because it just is a beautiful example of community care, of fresh paint on a crucificado that's used weekly, daily. You know, you're not going to find these, you know, half falling apart crucificados in anybody's church. Nobody prays like that, you know, and I feel like the reason I keep pointing that out is because of not stigma, but it's this perception of early New Mexican art that it's supposed to look worn. It's supposed to look like it was sitting in the sun, you know, kind of like that green work table I worked on, you know, it's supposed to be weathered and worn and wobbly. And I think part of Keith's reaction, and especially, you know, the way that he conserved that previous Bulto by Fra Andres, was because of that. You know, you see so many over and over again, the perception of New Mexican art. And, you know, after a while, you're like, hold on, these are like real people with important saints who are so deeply devoted to these objects. You know, this isn't just some wet piece of wood, and I'm tired of that. So I included this photo from the Laguna Church just to show how beautifully it was repainted. You know, somebody picked the specific design for his skirt. You know, the blood was intentional. It's all very stylized. His posture is very somber and sad. You know, these are objects of devotion. People care about these. So, I don't know, I think it's, and I know that the slide quality isn't the best, but, you know, once again, these are just, you know, these are what people love. This is people's art, you know, in their churches. This is an object from Casa San Ysidro's collection. And this is a Bulto by Moyano. And what's really cool about this one is that she was actually built into her nicho. And so the base that she's on slides in, and then the rest of it was built around her. So she was made for this nicho, and the nicho was made for her. The reason why you see her out of it was because the nicho was falling apart around her. So Keith took her out so that he could make the repairs without any chance of damaging her or, you know, nothing. So let me see, I have a couple more pictures. Let me see how far these go. Oh, not too far. Okay, so, and this is Our Lady of Sorrows, and you can tell because she has a dagger hole in her heart. I wanted to include her because she is one of my favorite saints. You can, I really feel connected to other people's connections to their saints, and how you want to see the pain and sorrow of, you know, Our Lady who watched her son die. I think that that's a very special connection, and you really get connected to her, you know, through her suffering, through her depiction of suffering, and these people for not gluing in their daggers, because we never ever find a dagger with the Lady of Sorrows Bultos ever. They're always missing, but we always look for that dagger hole. And again, you can kind of see that canvas. Let me see. Real canvas was used, and I don't know if it's canvas exactly, but it is fraying, kind of like canvas frays. I'm just taking an educated guess. It's fraying. They used it to drape over her and look like a real veil. And then that was covered in gesso and painted. You can see that on the photo on the left too. It really looks like fabric. Whoops, I don't know why it keeps doing that. There we go. So yeah, I just included her.
Any idea who the artist was for that one?
She's just beautiful. Her red, you can see her blue. It's attributed to Moyano. If not, it's, you know, School of Moyano. Cool. Did you get that, Aaron? I'm not lagging anymore. Good. Okay. Just double checking. Something else I wanted to point out with this Bulto is that, unlike St. Francis that we saw in my first part of the lecture, her face hasn't been cleaned at all. It's very, very dark, with the finish just aging over time. Super dark. You can tell that some of her high spots, you know, maybe somebody in her cheeks are lighter than, and her nose are lighter, but for the most part, she's totally untouched. There was no damage that needed to be repaired for this. Keith just wanted to snap a few pictures of her while she was out of her nicho while he was repairing it. And you can see the beautiful design work on the nicho as well. It's something that's super nice to see with those little rosettes on the top here and that pattern. Cool. I know I could look at photos all day, but I'll move right along here. This next one is also School of Moyano. It's Our Lady of Day. Let's see. Keith didn't have a year. He also wanted to ask me to ask anyone if they have a computer that still reads floppies, because he has a lot more information about each of the Bulto that he worked on actual floppies. So, you know, that's him being a jokester, I guess. And I was like, I sure as heck don't have a floppy reader. I don't even know what they're called. So I don't have a year for this one. But this is attributed to the School of Moyano. And this is just really interesting because on the skirt. So editors and curators have looked into the name Moyano, and there's no real like connection to a long lineage of Spanish descent. It's kind of an unusual name, and so people think that he's either indigenous to northern Mexico, or he's a Pueblo person, or somebody in his school is a Pueblo person that made these designs. So it's really interesting to see just the crossover, the mixing of skills and traditions and cultures. Let's see. Yeah, let me see. And she's also holding a little Christ child as well. Here we go. I think I have one more picture. Yeah. And oh, here you can see Keith making some repairs. It's a little bit hard to see, but he's also holding a hypodermic needle, squirting some glue into her. I'm not sure exactly what repairs she needed, but it looks like her shoulder had a crack in it right here. Yep, looks like he was just repairing that crack in her shoulder. And you can tell about the material for her her cloak. You know, it's so cool that they mix actual textiles with gesso, and they would harden, kind of making it look a little ambiguous about what it's made out of. So here we go. And here's kind of, because I talked a lot about devotion. I talked, you know, about this rejection of naturalism, this, you know, kind of new art style that came about in early New Mexican religious art, because, and you can see that there is a distinction, because this Bulto is from Ecuador, Keith's at the Denver Museum, and you can see that his paint is perfect, his face is perfect, he has a couple of damages, but what this Bulto really represents is just how New Mexicans treated their Bultos and still treat their Bultos versus how other cultures treat their Bultos. You know, this one, he's up on a shelf, you pray to him and then you leave. You know, he probably gets a regular dusting and that's it. You know, it's just totally different culture and relationship that the people who pray to him have than, you know, we see with our Bultos, where they're taken home, they're cared for, you know, you put safety pins on them to repair them, you know, a whole, let's see. That is a good guess about the whole holding a halo. You know, we don't know what it is. We were thinking it's a crown, it's a, you know, we didn't know. So that is a good deduction there from this Ecuadorian Bulto. I'll have to tell Keith that. Let me take some water real quick. And this one is just random. You know, Keith didn't need to work on this one. It was just him kind of expanding his knowledge of Bultos, and mine as well. You know, I've seen many slides on a light table of his work, looking through a loop, trying to, you know, get all the facts straight and learn the history, how different cultures treat their Bultos and their saint figures. So, you know, I just wanted to throw this one in there because, you know, even a shade of green is different. The paint is different. Like it's a whole different feeling and emotion that you get from, you know, an Ecuadorian Bulto compared to northern Mexico or, you know, a New Mexican Bulto. And so let me see. I think it's a little laggy here. There we go. Okay, so this one is actually from a Morada in Abiquiu that suffered a fire. And I included this because it really is a beautiful example of posture that you see when Jesus is on the cross. You know, you see this with little crucifixes too that are made out of metal. You know, this posture is just so, it's everything. You know, it's everything to do with the devotion. It's everything to do with the suffering of Jesus and how people relate to him when they're praying to him. And this one suffered a fire. So the one on the left is the before treatment, and the one on the right is after Keith cleaned it up and shined it back up. And I'm not sure if this is still being used in a Morada today, but I know Moradas are notorious for being kind of on the extreme side with their practices, with their, you know, penitentes and their, you know, willingness to go through what Jesus went through when he was dying on the cross. So just a good example of his posture and just what we see with that devotion. I know that's like the big theme here is devotion, but it's really true. It carries through in every brushstroke, in every repair, in every new household that these objects are passed down into. You know, people care about their Bultos, and it's obvious. We've never seen a Bulto that didn't already have some kind of repair. They always have a repair. People are always taking care of them. They've never been, other than that one that Keith fixed, it seems like they're hardly ever just left to totally rot away. And even the one that Keith fixed had a little toothpick in him. So somebody was trying their best to fix him the best they could. So yeah, let's see. I do have some added reading. I guess I accidentally flew through this, so I'd be happy to answer more questions if you had any. I did want to add some recommended reading from this couple authors that we love. Will Roth, Christian Images in Hispanic New Mexico. He discusses the Laguna Santero and Rafael Aragon, and then William Roth's other book, Images of Penance, Images of Mercy. I know, you know, Aaron loves that book too. It's super informational, informative. And that one says a lot about Ortega. And lastly, the Missions of New Mexico, 1776. That one is like a primary source. I haven't read that yet, but Keith told me that it's on my homework list, so I'll be getting there soon. These are just some readings to kind of study up on the history of Santeros themselves. Really great books. Yeah, so I am open to questions. I truthfully didn't mean to just fly through this. You can tell that I am a Zoom rookie, but I'd be happy to answer questions from anyone or Aaron, or if I totally missed something that Aaron knows for a fact I would have talked about. You know, let's see. Yeah, and there's my email in the chat that Aaron just put. And it's on the bottom of this slide as well. Feel free to email me with any questions that you might have. If I, you know, didn't go into as much depth as you would have liked today, I can certainly be more descriptive and informative in an email once I have some more sources in front of me.
Thank you, Allison. That was great.
Yeah, of course.
And
thank you so much for inviting me to do this. I'm sorry I didn't take up the whole time. Yeah.
No,
Yes,
that was perfect.
Yay. Yeah, thank you, Mary, and thank you, Dean. Let's see. I'll tell Keith about the eBay floppy disk readers because, you know, I'm going to tell him he's denying the people of knowledge here. I'm going to write that down, though, honestly. He needs to know his stuff.
For any questions about Casa San Ysidro or the Albuquerque Museum, feel free to email me. I'll put it in the chat too.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We appreciate your time and interest and patience. So it looks like we have one more question. Oh no, just a comment. Allison,
Oh, thanks so much, Kathleen. I really appreciate that. This is my second lecture for Casa San Ysidro. Our first one was also in 2019 that talked about traditional carpenter methods, and that was totally in Keith's wheelhouse. He was a rock star in that one. But we also were able to teach some children how to use some planes and some chisels and whatnot. And this is my first ever Zoom lecture, so I appreciate you all your patience with me learning this new medium. I know we've all been kind of forced onto Zoom, so we're all just working with what we got. But I appreciate
Well, you
all
do
your
a
time.
great job.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Why are the arms hollow?
Hollow. Really good question. And if you want to shoot me an email, I can answer that more in depth, because I don't actually know. My guess is that only part of their arms are wood, and the rest of the hands are, not the rest, but a good portion is gesso. So much like how they would sculpt the face onto like maybe a half circle of wood, and then the rest would be gesso in the front, so they could get the little details of the gesso. I think maybe they did the same thing with fingers. We see a lot of Virgin Marys like this, a lot of people holding things, to get those knuckles in there and those fingers. So if I had to guess, I would just say maybe it's a more intricate piece that fits into the hollowed out arm that stops kind of 3/4 of the way that's fastened. And maybe that's why we see so many that are broken off, is because it's not actually it's not actually one continuous piece of wood. So I hope that answers. If you want to shoot me an email, I can get some more information on any of the questions that anyone had today. How and where you learned color matching? So I pretty much learned it from practicing. I know that sounds like kind of a vague answer, but I just kind of have an eye for it that even Keith says that he doesn't really have, even after almost 30 years of practice. It's just kind of it's just sometimes, you have an eye for it. And I feel like I really fell into this. Like Keith is more of like the woodworker, carpenter, and I really fell more into the in painting and the color matching. That's something that school didn't teach me. It's just me staring at a pile of powders and trying to figure out how to make red and bright green and bright yellow into these more diluted tones by mixing them and trying. And I messed up way more than I succeeded, just like with anything that we learn. Yeah, I actually didn't explain that in the first 15 minutes, but this is recorded, so you can see what you missed whenever Aaron uploads that. I saw that you have a YouTube channel now, so that's cool.
Yes, for anybody wanting to see the whole recording, you can see this on YouTube in a couple of days, or you can go to the Albuquerque Museum's website. We also have a second Saturday coming up next month on April 10th, and that is all about Native American language revitalization. You can find the link on the Albuquerque Museum website, and if you have any trouble, feel free to email me personally.
Aaron, are you guys going to be doing some in-person tours soon?
We are open for tours right now. Unfortunately, we don't have the docents back at the museum just yet, so myself and the tour coordinator are spearheading that. So we are open to the public. Feel free to come in. We do not have in-person programming just yet, and I do not have word for when that will happen.
I was just wondering because, you know, from what me and Keith have seen just working on site, Ethan has a lot of really great information that he shares. So to anybody watching, I definitely recommend getting a tour with Ethan. He's great. And Aaron too. You know, I know we've all learned a lot about the collection too, about Dr. Minge.
For a scheduled tour, you can go onto the museum's website, and that's all done through Hold My Ticket. So there are 2 different tour times during the week, and then on Saturdays we have three tour spots available. And if anybody has trouble getting a tour, please feel free to email me.
Well, Aaron, I don't know if there's no other questions. I know we have the time for it, but you know, I know they don't always come right away. So I'm happy to get emails. I'm so happy that you all enjoyed this. I had a great time. Say thank you to Leslie for me, Aaron. I don't know if she's in this chat or this meeting right now, but yeah, just tell her thank you. And I'm really glad to have been able to give my second lecture for Casa San Ysidro now. It's really a lot of fun. And, you know, I love this museum. I think it's awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you, Allison.
Yeah,
Thank you, everyone.
thanks so much.
Have a great weekend.
You too. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.